there's no infinite supply of stuff. So we got to continue to think about what is it that continues to drive it. So I'm all for it. I don't know what the exact numbers need to be. I'm not an expert in that direction. The thing that I know is the way we are doing things, we have to constantly evaluate and say, is this the most efficient way to do it? Maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I didn't have to think about what 30 years ago. But now we have all for it, right? Now we have the ability. And use natural resources. It's time for us to figure out how do we have it now. The problem in creating like incentives for us to solve them is really the sustainability, like I said at the beginning, is so huge that you can't just say, if I do this, I reduce my demand, that'll be more sustainable. No, like even as a supply chain, I mean, as a brand owner, if you say, me and my immediate peers are sustainable, right, and my operation is sustainable, no, right? It is really a true ecosystem problem with the brand owner sitting in the middle, because you're relying on thousands and thousands of partners, and oftentimes partners that you don't even know you're relying on, that are contributing to your product. So how can you, where do you draw the line? Is your product sustainable or not? Are your operations sustainable or not? Right? So we got to constantly keep innovating, pushing the boundaries of our focus. And if as individuals we can do that, and as brands, brand owners and manufacturers and businesses we can do that, I'm pretty sure we can solve this problem. Because it's not one person solving the problem of one KPI, it's really continuing to do that. So coming back to your point, I think we need these kind of things to get us off the inertia that we have on our systems and our processes and the way we do business.
Yeah. I have to agree with all that you said. Now, my last, for the last question of our discussion, right? Because you mentioned quite a few interesting elements, and I want to kind of wrap it up. If let's imagine a multinational brand owner, a manufacturer comes to you and says, we need your help, and can you suggest us 1, 2, 3, or the first step that we should apply to make our supply chain operations more sustainable? What would you recommend? I know it's a broad question and you can pick and choose a bit more niche if you want, but how would you approach it?
I mean, there are a couple of dimensions in which we can proceed here, and I tend to have the path that I tend to follow is always create a vision, but make sure that there is a path to get to that vision, in a step-by-step fashion. Because easy to create a vision and rally everybody around it, but very quickly, if you don't create a path that helps you guide to that vision, everything falls apart. So I would really say, 3 things. Number one, you got to create a North Star, and then say, look, this is where we're kind of headed, and have a process to say, we can tweak that North Star. We can say, no, this is not what it is. We're going to continue to tweak that as we go forward, both in terms of the goal and the timing around when you want to reach it. But you got to put a challenge out there. You got to rally. You got to have a point to rally, and then you got to get to there in incremental steps. And if you think about it from a supply chain standpoint, it really is able to. I look at it and say, your problem is holistic. Your problem is around the ecosystem that you rely on to bring products to market, and in many cases, decide how those products, once they're used, get disposed. And I'm going to use disposed in a very loose term, because they could be reused, they could be composted and be absorbed into the environment, or they could be reused for some other purpose, right? Somebody's waste is somebody else's raw material, right? You can think about it that way. You got to think. I mean, that's the scope. Now, once you define that, then you got to start breaking the problem apart and say, where is it that I want to start? And the beauty of technology today is we have the ability now to start thinking about, the traditional silos of decision making and function. We have the ability now to start knocking them down. But before we knock them down, we got to think about actually getting them to a state where once the walls are broken down, the processes don't break. Right? By that, what I mean is you need to start thinking about digitizing them in some way, shape, or form. Taking them one step up so that they have the right touch points when the walls break. You can actually snap it onto something else, right? is really the piece. So that is a step-by-step process. You can't transform your entire company to a massive, large global enterprise. You can't flip the switch and say, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm digitized now and I'm sustainable. No, it is a journey that you'll have to go on. Maybe you start off with something as simple as, transportation. I want to avoid empty miles. I want to improve my transportation. Maybe you start off by saying, look, I want to reduce my reliance on, air freight, and I want to move it to the lowest impact freight movement. How do I do that? I don't do that overnight by switching from air to ocean. I do that by figuring out what parts of my production plan are sustainable, what parts of my production plan can be made, and what part of my demand is predictable enough that I can actually start producing 6, 8, 10 weeks ahead of time to be shipped, 4 or 5 weeks ahead of time on a container, so that when it actually gets to the port, I still have that demand. And the remaining demand I actually move to air because that's more variable. So it's not a change around a change in transportation doesn't mean change only in transportation. Right? It means upstream change in forecasting process, the planning process. And we've got customers that are actually doing that. They realize that, and in many cases they might be doing it from a cost efficiency perspective, but the sustainability comes in. Moving from air to ocean drives tremendous amount of waste in terms of dollars as well as in terms of carbon footprint out of your supply chain. So there are a lot of those things that are really same thing in terms of design processes, right? How much packaging goes in? Are you designing the right product with the right component so that when the product life cycle ends, those components that you might be ending up with can be reused across your next product life cycle or next generation. How do you phase in, phase out products so that you don't have excess of the old product left that you're then either selling at a very discounted rate and hurting your business? Because you got to think about also sustainable businesses are also businesses that can sustain themselves, right? They're not businesses that go out of business. Cannot deal with that. So I would think along those lines. Establish a true North Star. Create a path to how you get there. Think about incremental steps. Leverage technology, right? I'll talk about it from our perspective. I mean, as a software vendor, we think about it as how do we actually enable sustainable operations for our customers. And the way we do that is to take a step back and think about it like, what are the repeatable things that happen at every customer over and over and over again, right? It is the concept of tying applications, functional applications together. Every products are coming to market. There's demand planning, there's supply planning, there's transportation, there's procurement, there's channel operations. There are applications in these silos. Every customer of ours, most customer of ours, are tying them together, repeating them. Every customer is tying them together. Every customer is wiring them to the partners outside. And when we look at that and think about what is the sustainable way in which we can provide our services, we think about that as a network. It starts with a network. Once wired, you can reuse those connections across every customer and every partner that wants to use it. I'm not creating that extra work for every single one of them because they're connected to ours, right? That's sustainable from our standpoint. The same thing with applications. You got to connect planning to execution to manufacturing to warehousing to transportation to channel. And if you can do that once on a unified platform, how does it allow us to do that, right? So our approach from a technology standpoint, our approach from an acquisition standpoint, our approach from bringing other applications and creating an open platform is our contribution, we believe, towards making sure that that is also sustainable. The way we provide our business is also sustainable. So we'll continue to try to do our best, and we'll continue to try to see from a technology standpoint if we can enable knocking down the silos of those operations to create a path, going back to the recommendation that this is where we're headed. We want to get there in an incremental step, and you can do that in an incremental fashion on a piece of technology or technologies that you get there with operations that are digitized, but physical operations that are more streamlined and more sustainable.
And on that note, Pawan, I want to thank you very much. I think it was quite eye-opening, at least for me. I'm sure all our listeners have learned something from your sharing. Best of luck in helping as many clients possible get more sustainable. For sure we need it, for sure the planet needs it, and for sure we hear each other in the future as well.